Revenge with Karen.
He tapped the bonus slip like he was flipping a playing card at a bar. A flick of his manicured finger, a grin that belonged on a toothpaste ad, and then those four words that cracked something deep inside me. Lazy hands. No spark. I stared down at the number circled in blue ink, $1,500. After a year of back-end refactoring, cross-platform regression testing, writing the transition logic for a cloud migration that could have fed a small town for a decade, that number felt like a middle finger dipped in glitter. The room smelled like burnt coffee and Brent's cologne, some aggressive scent marketed to insecure middle managers. I didn't say anything, just gave him a tight-lipped nod and slid the paper back across the table. He pushed it back. "Take it," he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair like he just closed a $1 million deal. "Feedback's not personal, but enthusiasm is part of your review now. The board wants energy. Spark, not just execution. Execution. Like I was some kind of corporate guillotine operator. Never mind that I was the only one who actually understood the logic bridge between the old legacy sludge and the shiny AWS playground Brent promised in every meeting. Never mind that I'd already rewritten half the dependencies from scratch, documented the gaps, and flagged 3 critical risk points, one of which he literally deleted from the migration roadmap because it complicated the narrative. He called it narrative, like we were pitching a TV show. I was just trying to keep the damn servers from eating themselves. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. What was the point? Brent had been in the role for 3 months, and he'd already replaced half the team with polished LinkedIn clones who knew how to speak in agile Hakis. He wanted stand-ups full of smiles and Slack threads with emoji reactions. Not people like me, old enough to remember SharePoint disasters and young enough to still give a damn, but not dumb enough to play enthusiastic for pennies. "You've done good work," he said, standing. "Just not the kind of work we highlight. Legacy maintenance doesn't inspire vision." I should have laughed, but my throat locked. Not inspire vision. I'd spent 6 months designing the decision logic that would let the entire enterprise infrastructure migrate without tripping over its own database schema. I'd written it modular, layered, and bulletproof, so clean it practically self-debugged. But to him, it was just legacy maintenance. He hadn't even opened the binder I submitted. Knew that because I'd tucked a small yellow sticky note inside page 1 that said, "Brent, if you read this, I'll buy you lunch." That note was still there when I checked the next day, untouched. So yeah, I took the bonus slip, walked out of his glass office into the open floor plan circus, where the new hires were talking about some leadership podcast like it was the gospel, and I just kept walking. Past my desk, past the framed hackathon finalist photo, past the candy bowl I kept stocked for the interns who actually asked questions instead of Googling answers. I sat at my desk and opened the migration dashboard. Quietly, methodically, I tagged the integration phase as pending compliance review source logic and left a single line in the comments. Check with primary logic owner before production release. Then I opened a shell and encrypted the decision tree. Didn't delete it, nothing illegal, nothing malicious. Just stored it where it was supposed to go, flagged as sensitive IP, locked under my user credentials, and referenced in the internal tracker. Legal had approved that protocol months ago. We were required to protect proprietary processes, especially ones developed outside formal documentation paths. Brent would have known that if he'd ever attended the compliance briefing I sent to his calendar 3 times. I wrote a farewell email, short and forgettable, scheduled it to send after I walked out the door. Didn't CC Brent. Let him hear it from someone else. Maybe from HR when they realized they hadn't even scheduled my exit interview. Or maybe from Carl, the lead architect, if he ever found time between his real work and babysitting Brent's vanity project. I left the binder in my bottom drawer, locked it, left the key inside an envelope with Carl's name on it, taped it to the underside of my keyboard tray. As I stood there for the last time, I looked around the office. The walls were covered in fake greenery and corporate slogans like "Innovate fearlessly" and "Fail forward." Bullshit banners made to distract from the smell of nervous ambition. Nobody looked up, not Brent. Not the junior PM who still thought Jenkins was someone's last name. Not the HR girl who once told me I looked tired in a soulful way. And that was fine. Let them think I slunk away quietly. Let them think they won. Because Brent hadn't just underestimated me. He'd underestimated the very thing keeping his shiny little migration fantasy afloat. and I was about to enjoy watching him learn why lazy hands sometimes build things you'll never be smart enough to replace. I walked into his office the next morning with a smile so dry it could have flaked off and clogged his overpriced air purifier, and didn't even look up at first. He was busy tapping away at some Slack thread, probably reacting with a rocket emoji to someone's idea about gamifying team synergy. I dropped the envelope on his desk with a light thwap. Not dramatic, not angry, just final. He raised one eyebrow, then opened it like he expected a birthday card. Resigning, he said, already half smirking. Effective Friday, I replied, per the standard 2-week. Brent leaned back, steepling his hands like he was about to deliver a text monologue to a room full of failed Toastmasters. Look, I get it. Burnout happens. But I'd hate for you to make a rash decision just because the bonus structure didn't go your way. Ah, so that was his story now. I wasn't being replaced. I was having a tantrum over money. It was easier for him to believe than the truth. That I saw the writing on the whiteboard and decided I'd rather walk out with my spine intact than get slowly erased by his PowerPoint jockeys. I'm good, I said. Just feels like the right time. He nodded, clearly thinking he'd won. Probably already planning which bright-eyed intern he'd promote to technical migration champion or whatever fantasy title he was handing out that week. Well, appreciate you giving notice. Let's sync Friday for offboarding. Should be a breeze. I'll have Josh walk you through your transition checklist. Josh, a junior PM who once asked me if IP stood for internet password. Perfect. Sure thing, I said, already halfway to the door. Should be smooth. He didn't ask about the migration. Didn't ask what was documented or what wasn't. Didn't ask about the compliance note in the ticketing system. Because Brent didn't ask questions, he gave speeches. He had already decided I was just a bitter relic, not the architect of the one thing that could save his shiny reorg from turning into a flaming wreck. Back at my desk, I started the cleanup. No drama, no digital fireworks. Just surgical, quiet, lawful precision. First, I uploaded the final version of the migration logic, my logic, to a secured storage drive approved for internal IP-sensitive assets. It was encrypted, labeled, and timestamped. I set permissions. Legal view only, DevOps restricted, compliance required for access requests. Standard protocol, nothing sneaky. Just properly stored, properly tagged. Then I updated the internal tracker. On the project's central integration ticket under Next Steps, I added one line in the metadata, pending compliance review source logic owner sign-off required. It was subtle. Most folks wouldn't even notice it unless they clicked into the audit trail. It was legally binding. The clause had been written into the original DevOps framework 2 years ago, after a former engineer accidentally wiped a production table by deploying unvetted logic. After that disaster, we built in these traps. Brent didn't know because Brent hadn't been there, and because Brent didn't read. I scrubbed my local environment, zipped my personal scripts, and deleted anything non-essential from my machine. My farewell email, ready drafted and queued to send Friday afternoon. Light, professional, sterilized. I took one last walk through the server logs just for nostalgia. There was my logic, clean, minimal, no fluff. A decision tree that could scale across 5 departments without triggering redundancy loops. I'd built it like a spine, strong enough to support the whole damn body of the migration. And I knew, wouldn't realize it was missing until they were too deep in the weeds to back out. I paused before logging out of the internal wiki. I almost felt bad, not for Brent, for the few good folks left who still gave a damn. Carl, maybe, 1 or 2 junior devs who asked the right questions. But I couldn't save them from the storm that was coming. Brent wanted energy, spark, enthusiasm. Well, enthusiasm doesn't comment your logic branches. Enthusiasm doesn't rewrite your CI/CD pipeline to accommodate legacy edge cases. Enthusiasm doesn't save you when the API calls start throwing null objects at 3 a.m. I shut down my machine and slid my badge into my drawer. Still had a few days left, but I was done. Later that afternoon, I heard Brent holding court in the glass fishbowl he called his office. Something about reinvigorating the technical culture. The interns clapped. Brent smiled like a man who thought he'd just invented electricity by rubbing 2 buzzwords together. I walked past without a word. He didn't look up, didn't ask what I was working on, didn't ask how the logic handoff was going. Just kept talking about streamlining complexity to people who didn't know what complexity even looked like. Let him think I was easy to replace. Let him find out the hard way. By the following Monday, Brent Era had officially arrived, complete with a logo. I'm not kidding, they branded it. My friend Tina sent me a screenshot of the kickoff deck Brent unveiled at the All Hands, Operation Phoenix, Rebirth Through Agility. There was a Phoenix graphic with poorly vectorized wings and a mission statement that included the words synergize, cloud forward, and God help us, vibes-based collaboration. I nearly choked on my toast. Brent stood up there in his slim-fit buttoned, sleeves rolled to the elbows like he'd just descended from a mountain of transformation, grinning like a man who had reinvented oxygen. We're leaving behind the old ways, he said, pacing across the conference room like a discount tech evangelist. No more bottlenecks. No more dependency on tribal knowledge. We're building a culture of velocity. Tina whispered into her mic-less Zoom window. He means you. I laughed. Because yeah, he did. I was the bottleneck, outdated cog in his agile utopia. He hadn't said my name, but I was the ghost hovering over every slide. Every jab about low-energy execution, every hollow promise about team autonomy, that was all Brent, spit-shining his ego while pretending the entire migration hadn't been architected by the same tribal knowledge he was so desperate to erase. To prove his point, put a 25-year-old PM named Rhea in charge of the transition timeline. I remembered Rhea, bright, friendly, fast with a Notion board, but she'd once asked if our deployment pipeline lived on SharePoint. Brent handed her the reins like he was knighting her. Fresh eyes, he said, unencumbered by legacy assumptions. Tina messaged me the moment he said it. She just nodded. Poor thing doesn't know she's been fed to the wolves. And so it began. Rhea dove in with enthusiasm. Her Slack updates were full of exclamation marks. Stand-up notes posted, updated migration timeline, new tags for Q2 logic cleanup. I didn't have the heart to tell her that tagging a broken logic tree wouldn't fix it. But I didn't have to. The system would tell her soon enough. Because buried deep in the integration ticket, amid all the new comments and new labels, one line still remained untouched. I'd written it months ago. Simple, clear, legally correct. Check with primary logic owner before final implementation. It even had a red flag icon next to it. Nobody clicked. Tina said Carl noticed it once during a review session and frowned. But he was buried in 3 other projects, and Brent kept reassigning his time to higher visibility tasks. Carl, a man who once color-coded his flowcharts by error severity, was now too exhausted to chase ghosts. Meanwhile, his updates became increasingly confident. She posted a Slack thread titled Logic Flow Final Confirmation, WIP, with a Google Doc full of diagrams that looked like they'd been copied from a product blog. One arrow literally pointed into itself. Someone reacted with a fire emoji. Brent loved it. He even commented, "This is exactly what we mean by redefining ownership." Fire ownership. Of what, exactly? A logic chain no one could read, dependencies no one could trace, referencing systems no one had touched since the Obama administration. The final layer of irony came when Tina sent me a snapshot of the project's new Trello board. They'd made custom labels for each stage of the migration. One was green and said clean handoff. I stared at it for a long time. Clean handoff? I hadn't even spoken to Rhea. She never once messaged me. Never once asked if anything was pending, if there were caveats, if the system even worked the way Brent said it did. Because Brent had made it clear, I was the past. So I watched, from my couch, from my coffee shop, from my side gig where I now did systems consulting for small businesses that didn't confuse enthusiasm for competence. I watched the Slack screenshots roll in like postcards from a slow-motion car crash. Sandbox env throwing 500 fours again. QA stuck in loop, rollback triggered. Rhea's trying to reboot Jenkins like it's Netflix. Someone suggested rewriting the logic layer in Airtable. I didn't interfere. I didn't gloat. I just watched the edges begin to fray. And that little line I left in the migration ticket, the one about checking with the primary logic owner, still there, still untouched. Because Brent didn't check. Because Brent didn't think he needed to. And that was the beautiful part. I didn't have to lift a single finger. I'd already built the trap. All he had to do was walk into it. The first shake didn't make a sound, not at first. Tina sent me a screenshot one Thursday morning. A Slack message buried in a thread from QA, "Hey, Sandbox env isn't loading." Getting 500 twos, 500 fours, then straight 400 fours. Restarted 3 times. Logs empty. 3 error codes like a slot machine of doom. No one replied for 20 minutes. Brent chimed in with his go-to fix. Have you tried a hard refresh? I nearly spit out my coffee. By Friday, the environment was gasping. The test harness wouldn't compile. Data in the sandbox was showing corruption patterns, things that only happened when the logic layer didn't sync correctly with the old schema. Fields mapping to null, time zones going rogue. At one point, Tina told me someone actually suggested maybe we just update prod and see if it works there. The inmates had officially taken over the asylum. Meanwhile, Brent kept calling emergency stand-ups. He'd open Zoom calls with phrases like, "Let's solution this in real time, and failure is just feedback wearing a costume." He slapped together Trello boards titled things like "Obstacle equals opportunity" and "Roadblock smash squad," while the system coughed blood into a dirty rag. Rhea, poor thing, started stress posting on LinkedIn. Leadership is owning failure when the path is unclear. Migrating old systems takes bravery, but also vision. Speech balloon 42 comments. Brain, you got this. Read so inspiring. Repeat button Brent. Proud to have you driving this forward. Driving it straight into a ditch. By the second week, DevOps was holding nightly calls trying to patch test environments that wouldn't even boot. Container orchestration kept throwing orphan pods like it was rejecting the build at a cellular level. Rhea's diagrams got messier. Brent got louder. And Carl started digging. Carl, who had been shuffled off to some side project to make space for the next-gen thinkers, started pulling up old files, old diagrams, old commit logs. That's when he saw it. Tina messaged me one night, just a single line. "Carl found your initials." Been scrolling through the internal documentation archive and landed on a logic tree labeled INT-MIG Phase A. Inside, buried in the original comments, were 3 tiny characters next to a critical decision branch, //MR. Auth fallback via legacy token my initials. The kind I used on everything internal. Quiet, out of the way, but consistent. Carl knew what it meant. That branch. It was the kill switch, a place where I'd written the logic to preserve token handoff for older internal apps during the transition. Without it, half the API calls from legacy systems would misfire, and that's exactly what was happening. Carl started asking questions, not loudly. Carl wasn't a political animal. He was an engineer, and a good one. He didn't like drama, but he liked chaos even less. And Brent's Operation Phoenix was quickly becoming an inferno. First, check the handoff folder. Empty. No logic breakdown, no script comments, no trace of the fallback sequence. Then he checked the email archive. Still nothing. He even searched Confluence for the architecture binder. All he found was a placeholder page with a single sentence, "Documentation pending final review." He knew that was bullshit, so he messaged Brent. Asked if he'd seen the original schema notes for the integration tree. Brent replied with something Tina later quoted verbatim. "We sunset that dependency." Didn't feel aligned with the new vision. Sunset the fallback token bridge. That wasn't just reckless, it was radioactive. Tina told me Carl didn't say anything else for a few hours. He just opened up a few old directories, cross-referenced commit hashes, and sat there. Then, quietly, he started printing things. At 4:13 p.m., Brent called another emergency meeting. Calendar invite said, "Migration blockers. Let's unblock together." I imagine he thought the exclamation point made it sound collaborative. Carl didn't show up. Brent kept rambling, waving his hands like a man trying to redirect a flood with positive energy. The system doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be agile. Bugs are just signposts. The signposts were on fire. That night, Tina texted me a picture of the office printer tray. Sitting on top were 10 pages, black and white printouts of my architecture flow. On page 1, under the title block, was my name. Carl had found the truth. I didn't reply, just stared at my phone for a long time, then poured a bourbon. I wasn't smug, wasn't gleeful. But damn if it didn't feel good to be quietly, undeniably right. It started with a whisper, not a bang. Carl, who had built systems solid enough to survive 4 reorgs, a ransomware scare, a junior engineer who once accidentally deleted our billing logs, wasn't the type to stir drama. But when he asked the intern where my logic documentation was, and the intern blinked like he'd just been asked to recite the Constitution, something shifted. Tina sent me the play-by-play. "Carl, can you point me to the integration handoff folder?" Intern. Brent said it was all migrated to Notion. Carl, was it? Intern, I think it's in the Phoenix Phase Roman 2 vision board. Maybe under resources. Or wait, maybe archive. Carl didn't say anything. He just stared at the screen. Then he stood up and walked to the print room. That's when Brent decided it was time to start rewriting history. During the next migration sync, Brent pulled the team together, virtually and physically. Carl was remote that day. Everyone else sat in the fishbowl conference room, while Brent launched into what Tina called his spin cycle. I want to acknowledge we're hitting some bumps. Brent began, like a weatherman trying to frame a tornado as a light breeze. We're dealing with legacy decisions that weren't always well documented. Unfortunately, the previous owner of this architecture didn't leave us with a clean runway. He dropped it like a wet dishcloth. Everyone knew who he meant. Tina said there was a long pause. People glanced at each other. One of the junior devs started typing in Slack, then stopped. Brent doubled down. I don't want to name names, but when someone exits a project mid-flight, it creates turbulence. That's what we're managing now. Tina messaged me immediately. He just blamed you, full stop. Called the handoff messy. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because across the city, in a half-empty satellite office, Carl had already opened a filing drawer Brent never touched. See, when Brent took over, he focused on optics, the dashboards, the rebranding, the buzzwords. He never actually opened the drawers. He never noticed the taped envelope under the keyboard tray. Never looked for the binder with a spine labeled Transition Logic Auth Bridge plus Data Integrity. But Carl did. Carl always looked. He opened the drawer and found the envelope. Inside, a key. Used it on the bottom cabinet drawer, the one I kept locked with a physical tumbler because that cabinet predated the digital badge era. Brent had scoffed at it once, called it analog clutter. I'd called it insurance. Inside, he found the binder, printed, annotated, highlighted. 76 pages of diagrams, logic trees, legacy handoff instructions, API fallback sequences, security exceptions, rollback triggers, error state logic paths. A one-page legal summary approved by compliance in March, back when Brent was still learning where the bathrooms were. Carl flipped to the back. There was a sticky note, faded but legible. If you're reading this, you're not Brent. Thanks. MR. Tina told me Carl didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He just packed the binder into his bag and walked out of the room. That afternoon, Brent scheduled a follow-up. Called it reset meeting, clarifying the past, aligning the future. Carl showed up late. He didn't say anything at first, just set the binder on the table, slid it forward until it thudded against Brent's laptop, and opened it to the IP-sensitive logic summary. Then he said, flat as drywall, this wasn't messy. You just didn't look. Tina told me the silence that followed was religious, like the walls were holding their breath. Brent chuckled, tried to play it off. Well, looks like we've got what we need now. Let's pivot. Carl closed the binder, stood, and said, too late to pivot. You already deployed without verifying. Then he left. Tina's last message that day was just a screenshot of the team's Slack. Brent had posted a one-line message. Minor delay on phase Roman 2, reviewing documentation. More to come, no emojis, no fire icons, no hashtags. For the first time since he arrived, Brent's messages weren't soaked in fake sunshine. They were dry, tight, defensive. I poured myself a drink. A big one, not out of joy, not yet, but vindication. Yeah, it was beginning to shimmer, and Brent. He had just opened the door to the cave. The only way out now was through me. Carl didn't yell. He didn't march through the halls waving the binder over his head like some corporate prophet with stone tablets. He didn't need to. That's not how real power works in places like this. It was Friday afternoon when he found it, buried in the appendix of the documentation binder, behind the architecture diagrams, the integration flow trees, the legacy to cloud schema map, and a 4-page risk assessment I wrote back when I still believed someone might read it. It was a single paragraph, printed in 10-point font and bolded, tucked inside a section titled, Compliance Constraints, Execution Caveats and Legal Protections, Clause 4.3c. Any proprietary logic deemed IP-sensitive, as flagged by compliance and authored by individual contributor MR, requires direct sign-off from the original author prior to implementation or reuse in production environments. Failure to secure this sign-off constitutes a breach of the Internal Compliance Protocol, Ref. Doc #IPSQ 1899-03. Carl read it 3 times. He didn't text Tina. He didn't forward the file to anyone. He just stood up, closed the binder, tucked it under his arm, and walked to legal. The compliance officer on call that day was Diana. Sharp, old school, wore suits like armor, and once took down an executive VP for trying to bypass onboarding documentation on a shady vendor deal. Carl liked her. More importantly, Carl trusted her. He set the binder on her desk, opened to clause 4.3c, folded his arms and said, "Is this real? Diana, read it." Then she pulled up the compliance system, searched the reference document ID, and sure enough, there it was. A digital copy, time-stamped, approved, archived, unchanged. She scrolled down and confirmed the trigger conditions. Carl asked one more time, "Does this mean she still owns the logic?" Diana leaned back in her chair, laced her fingers together, said, "Unless you have her signature on a release form." "Yeah, you're frozen." Carl didn't smile. But Tina swears he exhaled in a way that made her skin crawl when she passed by legal that day. He didn't stop to chat. He didn't announce anything. He just walked out, silent and calm, binder tucked back under his arm like a man carrying a grenade with the pin halfway pulled. He passed Brent's office, paused, turned, walked in. Brent was on a Zoom call, trying to look composed while muting himself every few seconds to bark at someone off camera. When he saw Carl, he held up a finger, 1 sec, and gave him that $1,000 smile that had sold the board on his agile fairytale in the first place. Carl didn't sit down. He didn't speak. He just opened the binder, flipped to clause 4.3c, and slowly rotated it across Brent's desk. Brent glanced at it, then waved dismissively. "Yeah, got her documentation now. We'll patch what's missing. We're still on track." Carl didn't blink. He pointed to the line about legal breach. Brent leaned in, reread it, then sat back and said, "We're covered. I mean, that clause is outdated. It was signed before I even got here." Carl tilted his head. Compliance just verified it. Still active, still binding. Brent shifted in his chair. "This is just bureaucracy. Not telling me we have to ask her for permission to deploy a system we already..." Carl closed the binder with a soft thump, then turned and walked out. No argument, no threat, just gravity. He didn't head back to legal. He didn't go back to his desk. He walked straight to mine. Well, what used to be mine, the desk was still there, unclaimed, untouched. A few of my post-it ghosts still clung to the monitor. A cracked keyboard I refused to replace. Same empty coffee mug I left behind with a faded sticker that said "Code first, smile later." Carl sat down, opened the binder again, propped it upright, and waited. That's when Tina texted me, "He's at your desk." Just sitting there, binder open, staring into Brent's soul from across the floor. And Brent, door closed, lights off. "I think he's praying." I didn't answer. I just smiled, because Brent had pushed his chips all in without reading the rules. Now the game had turned. And the house still had my name on the title. It happened during the fire drill. Not a real one, just the quarterly ritual where everyone pretends the building might burn down and walks calmly to the parking lot with their iced coffees and Bluetooth earbuds still dangling. HR called it a safety culture touchpoint. Most people used it as an excuse to gossip in the sun or sneak off to vape behind the dumpster. But this one burned differently. Tina was the first to message me. "Carl's doing it, right now, at your desk." I paused mid-grocery aisle, holding a bag of frozen peas. Carl hadn't moved from my old desk in over a day. He'd been working quietly, flipping through the binder, highlighting sections, printing off compliance memos, and watching Brent unravel one Slack thread at a time. But now, as the fire alarms buzzed and the herd filed out toward the courtyard, Carl stood up, not to evacuate, not to follow the flow. He stayed, binder in hand. And when the office was mostly empty, just a few folks trailing behind, including Brent and his goons, Carl walked 2 steps forward, stood at the corner of my desk, and began to clap. Slow, heavy, deliberate, not joyful, not mocking, judgmental. Each clap echoed like a gavel in a courtroom no one realized they'd entered. Brent, who had just rounded the corner with a branded aluminum water bottle and a fire drill checklist, froze. The sound reached him before the sight did. Then he saw Carl, standing at my desk, documents fanned out like a deck of loaded cards. Clap, 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 everyone stopped. Even the interns, even HR. The guy from facilities who always wore headphones popped one out just to hear it better. Tina said you could feel the air tighten, like everyone had just stepped into an old western and realized who the real gunslinger was. Brent tried to smile, the performance kind. That shallow corporate grin that says, "Let's turn this awkward moment into a team-building exercise." He chuckled and raised his voice. "Hey, Carl, if you're done with your poetry slam, we've got a drill to finish." No one laughed, not even the guy who always laughed. Carl didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Just raised the binder slightly, enough for everyone to see the legal memo on top, and then placed it gently on the desk, right next to the coffee mug I'd left behind. Tina said Brent's face went through 4 stages of panic before he stopped moving. A junior dev whispered, "That's the binder," to someone behind her. A product manager muttered, "Wait, wasn't that supposed to be in the handoff?" The QA lead just took out her phone and opened the compliance channel in Slack. The room had turned, not with pitchforks, not with torches, but with eyes, with silence, with the slow, collective realization that maybe Brent's story didn't add up, that maybe lazy hands had built the bones they were all standing on, that maybe the reason everything was breaking had less to do with old processes and more to do with Brent chucking the instruction manual in the trash while humming to his own reflection. Carl didn't gloat. He just walked out, left the binder open, let the silence do the rest. Tina said nobody followed Brent after that. When the fire drill ended, people shuffled back in, but not toward him. They gravitated toward their desks, toward Slack, toward side conversations behind monitors and whispers in the kitchen. The buzzwords were gone. The sparkly vision boards, forgotten, and Brent. Brent sat alone in the fishbowl, binder in front of him, mouth tight, phone buzzing. Whatever smile he tried to glue on his face wouldn't hold anymore, because Carl had returned the truth to where it belonged. And the room, finally, believed it. The email went out at 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic time, not a Friday evening bombshell. Just a quiet Tuesday, mid-crisis, mid-sprint, mid-everyone pretending not to panic, while the system they were supposed to launch next week coughed error logs like it had a 2-pack-a-day habit. The subject line was polite. Clarification regarding Clause 4.3c Logic Use Authorization from my attorney. 2. Brent CC, General Counsel, Compliance Officer, CTO, and just for good measure Carl. Body was surgical. 3 paragraphs. 0 adjectives. As per the active clause referenced in the documentation provided by Mr. Carl R., specifically Section 4.3 C, regarding proprietary logic reuse, we wish to confirm that no authorization has been granted by the original author for the use of the logic in question within a production or pre-production environment. Use without such authorization constitutes a breach of internal protocol and may trigger contractual liabilities as defined under Compliance Framework IPSQ 1899-03. Please confirm whether deployment has occurred or if remediation is in process. No threats, no lawsuit language, just a question with sharp teeth. Tina messaged me 5 minutes later. GC is in Brent's office. Door shut. Brent's pacing. 10 minutes after that, CTO just walked in. That's 3 execs and a binder. I think it's your binder. Then, someone from HR just printed something. Looks like performance audit forms. Oh, Brent. While he'd been busy spinning his Phoenix fairy tale and tweeting about leadership with hashtags like #rise and grind and #agile vibes, the clock had been ticking. He thought if he just kept talking fast enough, kept holding flashy meetings and dropping startup lingo like confetti, the system would magically start working. It didn't, because enthusiasm doesn't fix logic gaps, and PowerPoints don't override compliance clauses. Carl had already told them the truth. The binder was now considered a source of record, and my name, attached to the one thing keeping them from a full-blown systems implosion just days before the board meeting. Tina said legal didn't raise their voice, but they did ask one question very softly. Did she sign a release? Brent fumbled, started blaming process ambiguity, started mumbling about verbal approvals and legacy expectations. Then GC slid a paper across the desk and said, flatly, "No release. You deployed under false assumption." That was when HR got involved, not with fanfare, not with a press conference, just with those little administrative teeth HR keeps hidden until the blood starts pooling. A quiet email went out. Reminder: please ensure all managerial decisions align with established compliance workflows and respect IP protocols. And then a second, more pointed one, flagged confidential. We're conducting a routine review of team restructuring practices during Q2, Q3. If you've received this message, may reach out for brief one-on-one conversation. Routine, right. Brent's direct reports got the email, Carl did not. Neither did Tina. Guess who else didn't? Me. Because I wasn't part of that team anymore. I wasn't inside the walls. I didn't need to be. Because Brent's little empire had been built on borrowed tools and unearned confidence. And now, under the glow of fluorescent lights and calendar reminders, the scaffolding was starting to collapse. Couldn't move forward. Not without me, and I wasn't lifting a single finger. Just sipping coffee and letting the clock run out. Strategic, measured, prepared. While Brent, for the first time in his performative little career, had no one left to blame but himself. They gave him the big screen, projector on, lights dimmed, coffee and paper cups no one touched. Brent stood at the head of the mahogany grave they called a conference table, flanked by laminated printouts of milestone alignment and phase Roman 3 readiness, as if bullet points could smother the smoke curling up from the wreckage outside. He was smiling, that tight, toothy, hostage-style smile that screams everything is fine while the floor disappears beneath your feet. Across from him sat 3 board members, gray suits, gray eyes, nothing in their hands but time and the smell of blood. To Brent's left, the CTO, fidgeting with his pen. His right, the general counsel, silent and stony. And next to her, flipping calmly through a stapled packet with 2 fingers like he was reviewing a brunch menu, Carl. The binder wasn't here anymore. Too bulky. Too heavy with consequences. Instead, Carl had prepared a single, clean, irrefutable summary, a revised roadmap of the infrastructure migration, with my name typed beneath the architecture diagram in bold, 12-point font. MR. Integration Architect Proprietary Logic Compliance required. No branding, no fire emojis, just truth. Brent began his pitch with a stammered sentence about momentum pivots and minor roadblocks. He clicked through a slide that used the word resilience 4 times in one paragraph. He mentioned team cohesion. He did not mention the sandbox failures, the unauthorized deployment, or the clause he'd ignored. That was Carl's job. Didn't speak until slide 6, when Brent tried to gloss over the temporary delay in deployment due to technical legacy variance. Carl interrupted with a calm, "Actually, that variance was protected IP." Brent froze mid-sentence. Carl reached into his folder, pulled out a single page, and slid it across the table. The compliance note, the clause, my clause, signed, time-stamped, verified, active. He didn't explain it. He didn't have to. General counsel nodded once. One board member leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, and tapped the paper gently. "Brent," he said, "you approved this migration path, correct?" Brent opened his mouth. Nothing came out, so the board member repeated, slower, "You approved this path?" Brent's lips moved. A syllable tried to escape, but his phone buzzed on the table. He looked down. It was legal. Tina told me later that the buzz echoed through the whole room. No one else moved. No one else smiled. The projector fan whirred. Brent picked up the phone but didn't answer, just stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. His mouth twitched once, twice, and then settled into a frozen half-smirk. Not denial, not confusion, recognition. He knew it was over. Carl closed his folder, stood slowly, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused, didn't look back, just said it, low and casual, lazy hands, huh? Then he walked out. Room stayed silent. Outside, the office carried on. Phones rang. Slack channels pinged. Someone probably posted a dog meme in #random. And me? I sat in my apartment with the window cracked open, the breeze warm on my arms, watching the last piece fall into place, not with fury, not with noise, but with relief. Because some men burn down the house just to feel powerful. Others build the foundation and wait for the wind to carry the truth through the cracks. I didn't shout, I didn't gloat. I just made sure the right eyes saw the right note at the exact wrong time. And now, Brent's smile is frozen in time, and mine isn't. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.